The bear smelled of damp earth and blood. It rose from the creek bed like a primal nightmare, water sluicing from its matted, dark fur. Amelia Thorne scrambled backward, the rough granite of the canyon wall digging into her palms, her heart hammering a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. The detailed map she'd been sketching, a secret tapestry of rock and shadow, lay forgotten in the dust at her feet, its precise ink lines a testament to a life that was about to end. The beast was massive, a hulking shadow against the sliver of afternoon sun that pierced the narrow chasm of Blackwood Canyon. Its eyes, small and black, held no malice, only a primal certainty. This was its territory. She was the trespasser. Her hand, slick with sweat, fumbled for the skinning knife at her belt. It was a pathetic defense, a toothpick against a mountain. But it was all she had. For 2 years since the Blackwood Riders had left her husband, Thomas, bleeding out on the prairie, this canyon had been her sanctuary and her obsession. He had started the work, mapping this treacherous, uncharted land, believing it held a secret worth dying for. It was a belief that had proven fatally true. Now, continuing his work was the only penance, the only prayer she had left. And it was about to get her killed. The bear took a heavy step forward, its head low, a guttural growl vibrating through the soles of Amelia's worn boots. She pressed herself harder against the unyielding stone, sucking in a breath that felt like swallowing broken glass. Her world had shrunk to this single, suffocating moment. The wet snort of the animal, the metallic tang of her own fear, the cold finality of the rock at her back. "Don't move," the voice came from the shadows above, low and steady, cutting through her terror like a razor. Amelia's head snapped up. A figure stood silhouetted on the rocky ledge 20 feet above her, a man as lean and weathered as the landscape itself. He moved with a quiet, unnerving grace, descending the rock face with the ease of a mountain cat. Before she could scream or question, he dropped the last few feet, landing silently in the dust between her and the bear. He held a smoldering pine branch, its tip glowing like a demon's eye in the gloom. He didn't look at her. His focus was entirely on the bear, his body a tense line of coiled energy. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, waving the makeshift torch in a gentle, hypnotic arc. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice a low rumble meant for the beast. Not for her. Just passing through, the bear huffed, its massive form hesitating. It eyed the flame, the unfamiliar scent of smoke and fire an offense to its primal senses. For a long, agonizing moment, the canyon held its breath. Then, with a final, frustrated snort, the bear lowered its head, turned, and lumbered back into the dense thicket of pine and shadow, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. Amelia's legs gave way, and she slid down the rock wall, her knife clattering to the ground. The stranger finally turned to face her, and the breath she'd just regained hitched in her throat. He was young, perhaps not much older than 25, but his eyes were ancient. They were the color of a stormy sky, holding shadows that had nothing to do with the canyon. A thin, silver scar cut through his right eyebrow, a stark white line against his sun-darkened skin. He wasn't a rancher or a prospector. He was something else entirely, something dangerous. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice devoid of the heroism the moment demanded. It was flat, cautious. She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. He bent down, not to help her, but to retrieve the map from the dust. He studied it for a moment, his expression unreadable, before holding it out to her. His fingers were calloused, his knuckles bruised. "This is foolish work for a woman alone," he stated, not as a judgment, but as a fact. Amelia found her voice, and it came out sharper than she intended. "I'm not looking for an opinion." "Who are you?" "Someone who knows this canyon better than most," he said, his gaze sweeping over her mapping equipment, the worn leather satchel, the compass, the charcoal sticks. "I've been tracking you for 2 days." A cold dread, colder than the fear of the bear, seeped into her bones. This was no chance encounter. "Why?" Instead of answering, he reached into the inner pocket of his worn duster and pulled out a small, folded piece of parchment. It was yellowed with age and stained along the edges, but as he unfolded it, Amelia felt the world tilt on its axis. The spidery, elegant script, the precise topographical lines, The unique compass rose drawn in the corner. It was Thomas's hand. A fragment of a map she had never seen before. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. A fresh wave of grief, sharp and savage, tore through her. It was as if this stranger had reached into her chest and twisted the knife that had been lodged there for 2 years. "Your husband was a better mapmaker than anyone knew," the man said, his eyes watching her with an unnerving intensity. "He mapped places even the ghosts don't go, places my father wanted kept secret." Amelia stood slowly, her body shaking. "Your father?" she breathed, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "The Blackwood Riders, the most ruthless gang of outlaws in the territory, who used this canyon as their impenetrable fortress. The men who had murdered Thomas. The man who leads them," the young man confirmed, his voice dropping, the words laced with a bitterness so profound it seemed to poison the air between them. "He's my father." He took a step closer, his gaze locked on hers. "My name is Elias Cole, and I need your help to find the one path out of this place that he doesn't control. A path your husband died trying to chart." He held out the map fragment, an offering and a threat all at once. "I can keep you alive. I can get you through this canyon and away from them, but in return, you will finish this map for me." Amelia stared at the scrap of paper, at the last piece of her husband's soul held in the hand of his killer's son. Her sanctuary had become a cage, and the only key was being offered by the one man in the world she had every reason to kill. And in the suffocating silence of the canyon, Amelia realized the bear had been the lesser of the two dangers she'd faced today. Amelia's grief solidified into a shard of pure, cold rage. The face of Elias Cole blurred, replaced by the ghost of her husband's smile. The memory of his hands, stained with ink and dirt, the last time she'd seen him alive. He had ridden out promising to be back by sundown, a new section of the canyon mapped, a new secret unlocked. He never returned. The man who brought him back, a grim-faced deputy, had said only Blackwood Riders. And now, the son of the architect of that sorrow stood before her, offering a devil's bargain with her husband's legacy as the price. "Get out," she breathed, the words tight with fury. She snatched her skinning knife from the ground, the worn leather of the hilt a familiar weight in her trembling hand. "Get out of this canyon, or I'll gut you where you stand." Elias didn't flinch. He didn't raise his hands or draw a weapon. He simply watched her, his storm-gray eyes holding a weary resignation that infuriated her more than fear ever could. It was the look of a man long accustomed to being hated. "I can't do that, ma'am," he said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "And if you think that knife will stop my father's men when they find you, you're more of a fool than he was." The insult, sharp and unexpected, struck her like a physical blow. "He was twice the man your father will ever be." He was. Elias agreed, the admission so quiet it was nearly lost in the canyon's whisper. He was also naive. He thought he could map this territory and just walk away. "My father doesn't let people walk away. Not with his secrets." He gestured with the map fragment, the paper a fragile ghost between them. "Silas Cole is a man who trusts nothing he can't control. He knows someone has been moving through the outer canyon for months. He thinks it's a government scout. When he finds out it's the widow of the man he already killed, he won't see it as a coincidence. He'll see it as a vendetta. And he'll end it." Every word was a cold stone dropped into the pit of her stomach. She had been so careful, using forgotten game trails, moving only in the late afternoon, leaving no trace. She had believed she was a ghost here, invisible. Now she understood she'd only been a curiosity, a puzzle the outlaws were slowly solving. "Why should I believe you?" she demanded, though the truth of his words was already ringing in her ears. "You're one of them. I was born one of them," he corrected, his voice hardening. That silver scar above his eye seemed to deepen. "That's a stain you don't wash out. But I haven't ridden with him in 5 years. Not since my father decided my conscience was a liability." He took a half step closer, ignoring the knife she held pointed at his chest. "This pass your husband was looking for," he called it Ghost Wind Pass. "It's a route through the Dragoon Mountains that isn't on any survey. It's the only way out of this territory that my father doesn't watch. It's my only chance to disappear for good. And right now," his eyes flicked from her face to the map in her satchel, "it's yours, too." Amelia's mind raced. To trust him was unthinkable, a betrayal of Thomas, of everything. But to refuse meant waiting for Silas Cole's riders to appear on the ridge. It meant the same fate as her husband. She was trapped, the canyon walls pressing in on her. Her choices narrowed to two different kinds of death. As if summoned by her thoughts, a sound echoed from the far end of the canyon. A high, piercing whistle, sharp and bird-like, but too precise to be natural. It was a signal. Elias's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body going rigid. "Scouts," he hissed, his calm demeanor evaporating in an instant. "They're sweeping the lower canyon. They'll be here in 20 minutes. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a desperate urgency. "You have to choose, right now. Die here for your pride, or live to see another sunrise with me." The knife in her hand felt impossibly heavy. The memory of Thomas's face, pale and still, flashed behind her eyes. He hadn't died for pride. He died for a secret this map held. To die now, to let that secret die with her, would make his sacrifice meaningless. Survival was its own form of vengeance. Slowly, her fingers uncurling, she lowered the blade. "Fine," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "I'll help you, but this is a trade. Nothing more. You keep me safe from your father's men. I finish the map. Once we find your pass, we go our separate ways. You don't ask about my husband, and I don't ask about you. We are ghosts to each other." A flicker of something, relief, maybe even a sliver of respect, passed through his eyes. Agreed. He didn't offer to shake on it. Some bargains were too grim for such formalities. "We need to move, now. Not back the way you came. Deeper in. They'll expect you to run toward the plains." He grabbed her satchel, his movements swift and economical. "Bring only what you can carry. We'll have to climb." Amelia shoved her knife back into its sheath and gathered her compass and charcoal. Every instinct screamed that she was making a mistake, walking deeper into the lion's den with one of the pride. But as she followed Elias Cole's lean form toward a nearly invisible fissure in the canyon wall, she knew this was no longer a choice. It was a reckoning. She had made a pact with her husband's ghost and his killer's son, and the path ahead was one from which there was no turning back. Sheriff John Brody knelt in the dust of Amelia Thorne's abandoned camp, the silence of the canyon pressing in on him. He ran a calloused thumb over the cold ashes of her fire pit. 2 days old, maybe 3, he'd known Thomas Thorne. Not well, but enough to respect the quiet determination in the man's eyes. He'd warned Thomas about mapping this territory, had told him that some lines were better left undrawn. It was a warning Thomas had ignored, and it had cost him his life. Brody had always carried a sliver of guilt over it, a nagging sense that he should have done more than just issue a warning. Now, standing in the widow's camp, that guilt was curdling into suspicion. The scene was all wrong. A bear attack, the Bensontown gossip had suggested. But the site was too clean. A single tin cup lay on its side, but the rest of her supplies were gone. Her bedroll, her food, her precious mapping tools. A bear would have shredded the place. This wasn't a mauling, it was a departure. A hasty one. His eyes, trained by 30 years of tracking men who didn't want to be found, scanned the ground. He saw her boot prints, small and distinct, leading away from the camp. But they weren't alone. Beside them, deeper and longer, was the print of a man's boot. Worn at the heel, a distinctive nick in the sole. They walked side by side, their tracks heading deeper into the canyon, not out toward the safety of the plains. Brody stood, a muscle tightening in his jaw. This wasn't a kidnapping. The prints were too orderly, the stride too even. She had left with him, willingly. For 2 years, Amelia Thorne had been the town's tragic phantom. A woman swallowed by grief so profound she'd become a recluse. Now it seemed she'd found company. But no decent man lived in Blackwood Canyon. Only shadows and killers. A cold, hard thought took root in his mind. What if Thomas's death wasn't as straightforward as it seemed? What if the grieving widow was playing a longer, more dangerous game? He looked toward the jagged maw of the inner canyon. "Amelia," he muttered to the wind, "what in God's name have you gotten yourself into?" He hadn't been able to save the husband. He'd be damned if he let the widow become another ghost in this cursed landscape. He mounted his horse, his face set like granite. The hunt had begun. The air grew thin as they climbed. The inner canyon was a brutal, vertical world of fractured rock and sheer drops. Amelia's lungs burned, her muscles screaming in protest. She was a mapmaker, a creature of patience and precision, not a mountain goat. Elias Cole, however, moved through the treacherous terrain as if he were born to it, his every step silent and sure. He never seemed to tire, his energy a low, steady flame that both infuriated and unnerved her. They stopped on a narrow ledge overlooking a chasm so deep the bottom was lost in shadow. 100-foot drop separated them from the other side. "We have to cross," Elias stated, uncoiling a rope from his shoulder. "Cross what?" "The air," Amelia snapped, her voice tight with exhaustion and fear. He ignored her tone, his focus on a gnarled, ancient pine that clung to the opposite cliff face. He swung the rope in a slow, practiced circle, the leather hissing through the air before he let it fly. The weighted end sailed across the chasm, wrapping itself perfectly around the tree's thickest branch. He gave it 3 hard tugs, the rope groaning in protest, but holding fast. "I'll go first," he said. "Secure it on the other side. When I signal, you follow. Don't look down." He moved out over the abyss, hand over hand, his body a dark shape against the vast, empty sky. Amelia's heart was in her throat. She was placing her life in the hands of a man whose name was synonymous with murder. The thought was a bitter pill. But as she watched him move with that impossible grace, a different thought surfaced. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't once treated her as a burden. He simply did what needed to be done. When he reached the other side and gave the signal, she took a deep, shuddering breath and followed. Her hands, raw and clumsy, slipped on the coarse rope. The wind tugged at her, trying to pull her into the void. Halfway across, her boot dislodged a piece of loose shale. She watched it fall, spiraling down into the darkness until it vanished. A wave of vertigo washed over her, and her grip faltered. A hand shot out, strong and sure, closing around her wrist. Elias had braced himself against the rock, his arm outstretched. "I've got you," he said, his voice a low command. "Don't think, just climb." His touch was like a brand, a jolt of unwelcome connection. But his grip was steady. It was life. She gritted her teeth and pulled herself the rest of the way, collapsing onto the ledge beside him, gasping for air. "Thank you," she managed to say, the words feeling foreign and inadequate on her tongue. He simply nodded, already untying the rope. "We camp here tonight. There's a cave just ahead. We'll be safe from the wind." Later, huddled in the shallow cave, the small fire Elias had managed to coax from a handful of dry scrub pushed back the encroaching darkness. The flickering light cast long, dancing shadows on the rock walls. They sat in a tense silence, the chasm of their histories stretching between them. To fill it, Amelia pulled out her incomplete map and the fragment from Thomas. She laid them side by side on a flat stone, trying to make sense of the new, treacherous landscape. "He was close," she murmured, more to herself than to Elias. "He marked this ridge, but his line just stops." Elias leaned forward, his shadow falling over the parchment. He pointed a finger at a spot near the edge of Thomas's fragment. "What are these?" Amelia squinted. In the firelight, she saw what she'd overlooked in the canyon's glare, a faint cluster of 7 pinpricks, arranged in a familiar pattern. They weren't landmarks. They weren't notations for elevation or hazards. They were too delicate, too deliberate. Her breath caught in her chest. It was a code, a simple cipher Thomas had devised years ago, a way to leave notes for her in his journals. He'd used the constellations as his key. Her finger traced the pattern. "The hunter, Orion." "It's not a map of the canyon," she whispered, a sense of awe and dread rising in her. She looked up at Elias, her eyes wide in the flickering light. "It's a map of the stars." "It's a map of the stars," Amelia repeated, the words feeling both impossible and profoundly true. She looked from the parchment to the sliver of night sky visible through the cave's mouth. The stars were brilliant in the moonless dark, cold and distant, yet they held the key. Elias stared at the pinpricks, his initial skepticism warring with the fierce certainty in her eyes. "The stars?" he said, his voice rough with disbelief. "The canyon floor is what matters, not the sky." "Not to him," Amelia said softly, a fresh ache in her chest. "Thomas always said you can't fence the sky. He believed the land held memories, but the stars held promises." Her fingers, smudged with charcoal and dust, traced the Orion pattern on the map. Each constellation was a waypoint. He wasn't mapping the terrain itself. He was using the stars to plot a course through it. The angles, the distances, it's all relative to the position of these stars at a specific time of night. A slow understanding dawned on Elias's face, chasing away the shadows of doubt. He looked at the map with new eyes, not as a simple drawing of rock and dirt, but as a complex, elegant puzzle. It was the work of a mind far more intricate than his father could ever comprehend. So the pass, it only reveals itself if you know how to read the sky. Exactly, Amelia confirmed. For the first time since he'd appeared, they weren't widow and outlaw son. They were two minds locked on a single problem. A fragile, unspoken truce settled between them, born of a shared intellectual challenge. We need to find a high point, somewhere with a clear view of the southern horizon. Thomas's next waypoint would be marked by the brightest star in Canis Major. Sirius, Elias murmured, the name of the star a familiar echo from a long-buried past. He stood and looked out at the canyon, his gaze sweeping the jagged silhouette of the opposing cliffs. I know a place, the Eagle's Perch. It's a difficult climb, but from there, you can see the whole territory laid out like a blanket. The climb was more than difficult. It was a grueling test of will. They moved through the pre-dawn chill, Elias leading the way, his knowledge of the treacherous paths their only guide. He pointed out loose rock, footholds hidden in shadow, and the quiet places where a misstep meant a silent fall into nothingness. Amelia, in turn, guided their direction, her compass and Thomas's star chart her instruments. She would stop, take a reading, and point. That way, we need to stay on a bearing of 195. It was a strange, symbiotic rhythm, a dance of reliance that neither of them would acknowledge. They reached the Eagle's Perch as the first blush of dawn painted the eastern sky. It was a flat, windswept mesa, littered with stones that looked like broken teeth. From here, the world fell away. They could see the plains stretching to the horizon, the dark scar of Blackwood Canyon, and the distant, hazy peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. As the sun rose, Amelia laid out the map and began to work. Using Elias's knowledge of local landmarks and her celestial chart, she started to connect the stars to the earth. The Hunter's Belt became a series of 3 distinct buttes. The Dog Star pointed not to a pass, but to a place where the canyon wall seemed to weep water, a dark stain of green moss on the red rock. There, she said, her finger tapping the new ink line she'd drawn. That's the next waypoint. It's not a pass, it's an entrance. They found it late that afternoon. The entrance was perfectly hidden behind a cascade of hanging vines and the weeping rock face, a narrow fissure that was invisible until you were standing directly in front of it. A cool, damp air, smelling of deep earth and stillness, breathed out from the opening. A cave system, Elias said, his voice low. My father always believed there were tunnels in these mountains, but he never found the entrance. They lit a torch from their dwindling supplies and stepped inside. The fissure opened into a vast cavern, the torchlight flickering off damp limestone walls that glittered with calcite crystals. It was silent, the kind of profound quiet that feels ancient. In the center of the cavern floor was a circle of blackened stones. A fire pit. The ashes were cold, but not ancient. Weeks old. Perhaps. Beside the pit lay a small, discarded object, a strip of blue calico cloth, torn and faded. Amelia picked it up. The fabric was simple, common, but it was proof. Someone was here. Elias knelt, examining the ashes. More than one person. They were careful, burned everything that could identify them. His eyes scanned the cavern, a new tension in his posture. This wasn't the empty sanctuary he had imagined. This was a hideout. He walked deeper into the cave, toward the back wall. His hand rested on a series of rough carvings etched into the stone. They were crude, almost childlike, but unmistakable. 7 stars, arranged in the shape of Orion's belt and sword. Beside them was another carving, the Big Dipper. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. My mother, he whispered, the words so quiet Amelia almost didn't hear them. He traced the outline of the Big Dipper, his fingers trembling slightly. She used to show me the stars when I was a boy, before my father became what he is. She called the Dipper the drinking gourd. She said it was a map for people who were lost, a map to a place with no fences, no brands, a map to freedom. He turned to Amelia, his eyes filled with a raw, unguarded pain that stripped away the hard facade, leaving only the boy he'd once been. She died in this canyon. My father said she fell, but she was a better climber than any of us. I think she was trying to leave him. I think she was following this map. Amelia's own grief, a constant, dull ache, resonated with the fresh agony in his face. In that moment, he wasn't Elias Cole, the outlaw's son. He was just a man haunted by the ghost of a mother he'd lost, just as she was haunted by a husband. They were bound by the same cartography of loss. Her anger, her hatred, it didn't vanish, but it was joined by a new, unwelcome feeling, empathy. She saw now that he wasn't just running from his father's legacy of violence. He was running toward his mother's legacy of hope. A sound, faint but sharp, echoed from a dark tunnel leading deeper into the cave system. It was the scrape of a boot on stone. They weren't alone. Elias extinguished the torch instantly, plunging them into absolute darkness. He drew his pistol, the click of the hammer cocking sounding deafeningly loud in the sudden silence. They stood frozen, hearts pounding, listening to the suffocating dark. The whispers of the stars had led them to a secret, but it was a secret someone else was still keeping. The darkness in the cavern was a living thing, absolute and suffocating. It pressed in on Amelia, erasing the walls, the ground, even the man standing inches from her. The only reality was the cold weight of the pistol Elias had pressed into her hand, and the sound of his ragged breathing next to her ear. The scrape of boot on stone echoed again, closer this time, followed by a low murmur of voices from the tunnel. They were trapped, caught between the secrets of the dead and the threat of the living. "Stay here," Elias whispered, his voice a ghost in the blackness. "Don't make a sound. Don't fire unless you see the flame of their torch." Before she could protest, he was gone, melting into the darkness with a silence that defied belief. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She was alone, armed, and blind, every nerve screaming. The voices grew clearer now, echoing strangely in the vast space. It wasn't the harsh, guttural speech of outlaws she'd expected. It was softer, tinged with accents she couldn't place. One voice was a woman's. A pinprick of light appeared at the mouth of the tunnel, growing steadily into the warm, flickering glow of a lantern. Two figures emerged, their shadows leaping and dancing on the cavern walls like giants. One was a tall, gaunt man with a weathered face and a shock of white hair that seemed to glow in the lamplight. The other was a woman, her hair bound in a tight gray bun, her face a roadmap of hard-won wrinkles. She carried the lantern, while the man held an old, long-barreled rifle. They stopped short, their eyes widening as the light fell upon the dead ashes of Elias's fire. "We have visitors," the woman said, her voice steady but laced with steel. From the shadows behind them, Elias spoke, his voice calm and clear. "We mean you no harm." We followed a map. The old man spun around, leveling his rifle at the sound. "Show yourself," he commanded. Slowly, Elias stepped into the circle of light, his own pistol held loosely at his side, pointed at the ground. "My name is Elias. This is Amelia. We're not here to cause trouble." The woman, whose eyes held a sharp, assessing intelligence, studied him for a long moment. "You have the look of the canyon about you," she said. "The look of Silas Cole's brood." Elias's jaw tightened. "He is my father. I am not him. Words are cheap in these mountains." The old man growled, his finger tight on the trigger. "We're not alone," a new voice called out. A young boy, no older than 12, emerged from the tunnel, followed by a woman carrying a baby. More people appeared behind them. A family, their faces pale and drawn, their clothes patched but clean. A community. They huddled together, their expressions a mixture of fear and defiance. "What is this place?" Amelia asked, stepping out of the shadows, her own pistol now lowered. The old woman looked from Amelia's determined face to Elias's haunted one, and something in her gaze softened. "This is sanctuary," she said, her voice taking on a quiet reverence. "It is a place for those who have nowhere else to run. A place for people fleeing injustice, false debts, the kind of laws that serve the rich and hang the poor." She gestured to the families gathered behind her. This family was sharecropping on land a cattle baron decided he wanted. The father was accused of rustling. The judge was in the baron's pocket. They were to be evicted, the father imprisoned. They chose to disappear instead. Amelia looked at the map in her hand, the star charts, the coded waypoints. It all clicked into place. "Thomas," she breathed. "My husband. He wasn't mapping a pass. He was mapping a route to safety. An underground railroad through the mountains." The old woman, whose name was Sarah, nodded grimly. "He was a good man. One of the few outsiders who knew of us. He helped chart new, safer routes after Silas Cole's riders started sweeping the lower canyons. He was on his way to meet us the day he was killed. We believe he was betrayed." Her eyes held Amelia's. "We've been watching you for weeks, Mrs. Thorne. We saw you continuing his work, but we did not know if you could be trusted." Not with him. Her gaze shifted to Elias. I'm trying to leave that life behind, Elias said, his voice raw. He looked at the crude star carvings on the wall. My mother. Did you know her? A woman named Lena? Sarah's stern expression crumpled, her eyes filling with a profound sadness. We knew her, she said softly. She found us, yes. She was trying to escape her husband. She brought us supplies, medicines. She spoke of a son she hoped would one day find his own path. Sarah's voice broke. Silas found out. He followed her. He didn't kill her here. He took her back, and we heard she had an accident on the trail a week later. A fall. The air went out of Elias's lungs. The story his father had told him was a lie, a cruel twisting of the truth to hide a murder. He stumbled back against the cavern wall, the weight of his mother's true fate crushing him. He had spent years hating her for abandoning him, when all along, she had died trying to forge a path he could one day follow. At that moment, a sharp whistle pierced the silence from outside the cave entrance, the same signal Elias had heard before. A young lookout scrambled back into the cavern, his face pale with terror. Riders, he gasped. A dozen of them. They've found the entrance. Panic erupted. The families huddled closer, the baby beginning to cry. Sarah's face hardened. Silas, she spat. He's found us. There's another way out, the old man, Jacob, said, grabbing his rifle. A tunnel that leads to the high peaks, but it's a tight squeeze. We must go now. He won't just let us leave, Elias said, his grief instantly replaced by a cold, hard fury. He was no longer running. He was a cornered wolf, ready to fight. He'll block the exit. He'll smoke us out. He'll kill every last one of you to keep his secrets buried. He looked at Amelia, his eyes burning with a new, terrifying purpose. Your husband's map got you this far, but it ends here. There's no past left to find. There's only a fight. Amelia looked at the frightened faces of the families, at the memory of her husband's sacrifice, at the raw pain in Elias's eyes. He was right. There was no escape. The map hadn't led them to a hidden past, but to a hidden purpose. To a choice. She looked at Sarah. Is there another way to the Eagle's Perch from here? Sarah nodded. A chimney vent. It's a dangerous free climb. I need to get a message out, Amelia said, her mind working with the cold precision of a mapmaker. There's a lawman tracking me, Sheriff Brody. If I can signal him, if I can bring the law down on Silas while he's trapped in this canyon, it's our only chance. She turned to Elias. I need a distraction. I need you to buy me time. Elias looked toward the entrance, where the shouts of his father's men were now audible. He looked at the families, their lives hanging in the balance. He was his father's son, but he had his mother's map in his heart. I can do more than that, he said, his voice grim. My father is here for a traitor. I'll give him one. He turned and walked toward the cavern entrance, toward the sound of his father's voice. He was no longer running from his past. He was going to face it, and in doing so, rewrite the ending of his mother's story, and his own. While Elias walked toward his father, Amelia scrambled toward the sky. The chimney vent Sarah had described was a brutal, near-vertical fissure of rock, slick with moisture and barely wide enough for her shoulders. Every handhold was a gamble, every foothold a prayer. The wind howled down the shaft, a mournful beast trying to tear her from the mountain's face. Below, the shouts of the Blackwood riders echoed, a rising tide of violence. She didn't think of Thomas now. She thought of the frightened faces in the cavern, of the baby's soft cry, of the quiet strength in Sarah's eyes. She was no longer just preserving a memory. She was fighting for a future. Outside, at the mouth of the cave, Elias stepped into the harsh afternoon light. His father sat astride a black stallion, his face a mask of cold fury, flanked by a dozen of his most ruthless men. For a moment, the canyon was silent, the two Coles locked in a gaze that spanned a lifetime of fear and resentment. So, the prodigal whelp returns, Silas Cole sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. I heard a rumor you were skulking in my territory. I see you found yourself some new friends, squatters and thieves. Their families, Elias said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded against his ribs. They've done nothing to you. Anything that happens on land I control is my business, Silas retorted, his hand resting on the polished butt of his revolver. And anyone who helps them is a traitor. You, of all people, should know the price of treason in this family. He looked past Elias, toward the darkness of the cave. Your mother learned that lesson well. The words were a calculated cruelty, meant to break him. But Elias felt something else. Not the old, familiar fear, but the clean, cold anger of a man who had finally found a line he would not cross. She was trying to escape you, Elias said, the truth a weapon he'd never had before. She found this place. She found hope. And you murdered her for it. Silas's face contorted, his composure cracking for a single, terrifying second. She was weak. She betrayed my name, as you are now. He drew his pistol, the movement fluid and deadly. You have one chance. Step aside. Let me burn this nest out, or die with them. Elias drew his own gun, the weight of it a final, irrevocable choice. No, he said, his voice ringing with a strength that was entirely his own. This is where it ends. At that moment, high above them, Amelia reached the top of the vent. She crawled onto the windswept ledge of the eagle's perch, her body screaming, her hands bloody. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the land. From her satchel, she pulled the small, polished signal mirror Thomas had always carried. Far in the distance, a lone rider was visible against the plains, a tiny speck of dust and determination. Sheriff Brody. She angled the mirror, catching the sun's dying rays, and flashed it once, twice, 3 times toward the rider. A desperate, silent plea sent across the vast, indifferent landscape. Down below, Silas's patience snapped. Kill him, he roared. The canyon exploded in a cacophony of gunfire. Elias dove behind a rock outcropping as bullets chewed into the stone around him. He returned fire, not wildly, but with the cold precision his father had taught him, making every shot count. From the cave, Jacob's long rifle cracked, its deep boom echoing off the walls as one of the riders tumbled from his saddle. The people of Sanctuary were not waiting for a savior. They were fighting for their own survival. The battle was a blur of smoke, chaos, and fear. Elias moved from cover to cover, his knowledge of the terrain his only true ally, drawing the riders' fire, giving the defenders a fighting chance. He saw his father, directing the assault with a chilling detachment, sacrificing his own men to flush out his son. This wasn't a raid, it was an execution. Silas, enraged by the unexpected resistance, spurred his horse forward, charging directly toward the cave. He would end this himself, but as he neared the entrance, a volley of rifle fire from the darkness forced him back. His horse reared, screaming, and a lucky shot from Jacob tore the pistol from his hand. It was then that the thunder of hooves answered the thunder of gunfire. Sheriff Brody and a posse of 6 deputies crested the ridge, their rifles ready. They had seen the signal. The Blackwood riders were caught, trapped between the resolute defenders in the cave and the unyielding arm of the law. The fight was over in minutes. Some riders threw down their guns, others tried to flee and were cut down. In the sudden, ringing silence, only Silas Cole remained, disarmed and dismounted, his empire of fear crumbling around him. He stood alone, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, undiluted hatred. Brody approached, his shotgun leveled. Silas Cole, he said, his voice hard as iron. It's over. Silas looked from the sheriff to the mouth of the cave, where Elias now stood, smoke curling from the barrel of his pistol. Their eyes met one last time. In his father's gaze, Elias saw no remorse, no regret. Only the bitter fury of a king who had been dethroned by his own blood. You are no son of mine, Silas spat, just before the deputies took him into custody. As they led him away in chains, a man whose power had been his entire world now reduced to a prisoner, Amelia scrambled down from the perch. She reached the canyon floor as the last of the posse was rounding up the outlaws. She saw Elias standing there, watching them go, his shoulders slumped, the adrenaline of the fight replaced by the heavy weight of what he had done. She walked up to him, stopping a few feet away. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. He had saved them all. He had faced his monster. It's done, she said softly. He nodded, not looking at her. My name will follow me forever. A name is just a word, she replied, her voice firm. A life is what you build. You started building a new one today. He finally turned to her, and she saw the deep, soul-weary exhaustion in his eyes. But beneath it, there was something new, a flicker of peace, a glimmer of a future he had never believed he could have. Weeks later, Amelia stood on a hill overlooking a green, watered valley hidden deep within the territory. The community of Sanctuary had relocated, building a new, permanent home, safe and secret. Sheriff Brody had kept his word, burying the official report in a mountain of paperwork, listing the Blackwood gang's demise as the result of an internal feud. Elias stood beside her. He had stayed, helping the families rebuild, his quiet strength a constant, reassuring presence. In her hands, Amelia held a new piece of parchment. It was a map, but not a secret one. It showed the layout of their new settlement, the location of the schoolhouse Sarah was planning, the fields Jacob was clearing, the home sites for the families. "I was thinking of leaving," Elias said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Heading north, so my father's shadow doesn't fall on this place." Amelia turned to him. The anger she had once felt was a distant memory, replaced by a deep, abiding respect and a warmth that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. "A shadow is just an absence of light, Elias," she said. "We have plenty of light here." She held out the map to him. "Besides, this map isn't finished. It needs a name for the river, and someone has to help me chart the land on the other side of the valley." He looked from the map to her face, a slow, hesitant smile touching his lips for the first time. It was a smile that held the promise of a new beginning, of a life charted not by the stars of the past, but by the shared ground beneath their feet. "I reckon I could help with that," he said. And together, under the vast, open sky, they stood looking out at the world they would map together, their own sanctuary, built not of secrets and rock, but of courage, trust, and the quiet promise of a home.